Hello and welcome to this panel on telecom social impact, enabling opportunity through connectivity. I'm Alex Webb. I'm a columnist on the opinion team at Bloomberg, and I'll be leading this discussion. I won't introduce everyone. You can see all the names in front of you, hopefully, and I'm delighted to be joined by such a well-qualified and successful, knowledgeable panel. I think that it'd be great to sort of launch straight into it. We're clearly on the cusp of 5G changing a lot of people's lives. And the way that we think about 5G is clearly a little bit different from earlier generations. 4G was really about enabling things like the app economy, Instagram, YouTube, Uber, Airbnb, video connectivity. Was very much about the consumer. Connecting people more readily for better and worse. 5G seems to be more about the enterprise and the Internet of Things, and perhaps helps explain why it's such a pillar of China's economic plan. I therefore thought it might be an interesting place to start with Jamshid and Adam, people whose companies, IBM and Cisco respectively, are working a lot of these technologies. And I'm intrigued, perhaps Jamshid, to hear from you first of all. What is the big difference with 5G? What, particularly from a social perspective or societal perspective, what will be different from 4G?
Thank you. Without going through technical detail, I mean, obviously technology is different. I mean, you could say there are some differences. One is that the technology is much more open and kind of disaggregated. It provides capability for more participation. And also they have other capability in terms of low latency. I mean, you can access the thing with a short amount of the time capability, or be able to have the kind of the connection in the kind of dense area. Let's say you're in a stadium, you're in the city center, something is going on, more people can have access to it. So all of these things coming, but the thing is that, as you were saying, it looks like the most benefit is going to come to the enterprises. And especially when you combine the 5G with the edge technology together, because just simply you're bringing that capability close to the users, then it gets the benefit become the triple and more. So for example, the use cases and the scenario looking at, think about the 5G and edge trying to create next generation IoT. So applying them to the agriculture, applying them to the manufacturing, applying them to the healthcare, or even education. I mean, providing those things here. So 5G is bringing a set of the capabilities that first, as I said, is going to enable more participation. So it's not going to be only dedicated to a group of the special companies and businesses. It opens the kind of the field for everyone, and then brings the capability, which mostly is going to be focused on the enterprises in agriculture, manufacturing, education, healthcare. For example, let's talk about some of the kind of the countries that they don't have enough medical staff. I mean, so by doing that one, you can enable telemedicine because of the better connection, because of more stable connection, and also much secure connection. Then you can bring lots of benefit to the population that have been disadvantaged for a long, long time. And the other thing also, just really, that's also provide capability. Not certain capability is only belongs to the Western world. So you can bring that one to all the other nation trying to take advantage of that one.
That's really interesting. And I suppose then, I mean, Adam, do you feel there are things that are worth adding to that, or slightly different perspective?
Thanks, Alan. Building what Amshad said, I think 5G, if we look at the business case, obviously, from a consumer perspective, there's going to be more capacity, but that's not really where all the benefits are going to be felt. It's those enabling those new vertical markets, new use cases in industry, in public sector, connected health, etc. So, but I think we have to look at it much broader than that as well. As we've gone through the pandemic, 5G has to work seamlessly with 4G, but it has to connected and broadband, those fiber connections and the investments that are going to go in. And when we look at it as an access technology, that spectrum flexibility, when you look at the digital divide connecting the unconnected, it's really in rural locations where people are struggling to connect. So I think there's a big part that.
So can you unpack when you say spectrum flexibility, what does that mean?
Well, because the radios can work in many different, so we can get better coverage or we can get smaller cells with much more high capacity throughput. So if you think of an industrial location, we can get very high capacity into those locations where we couldn't before, and reliability. But that's going to have to work hand in hand with Wi-Fi 6 that's going to be deployed in those locations. Similarly, if we adopt a different spectrum, we can get very wide coverage for rural locations where perhaps we couldn't before, where we know there's huge demands for that digital enablement as well.
Sheikh Mohammed, as the CEO of Ooredoo's sort of domestic business, you are a company that is, I think, just over 2/3 owned by the state. I think I'm right in saying that. You clearly have different priorities. It's the question, I suppose. Do you have different investment priorities from, say, a Vodafone or an AT&T? So when you're looking at how to deploy these networks, you're thinking about it differently than would a company that's purely driven by the profit motive, for instance.
Alex, thanks for having me here. Just to answer your question, I don't think we vary in strategy among all the operators that you mentioned, or global operators. The industry we are in, or the operators, always put the investment or capex to have a very sufficient, reliable infrastructure. So today, if I touch base what other colleagues said about the 5G, there is a race on 5G, and we, as you rightly touched also, it's really affecting the enterprise and business and that industry more than the consumer. Yes, in the consumer you would see the speed or latency as well, and that I would focus here on the latency. Let's say we talked about verticals, either the health, financial, education, whatever. If I just take a use case of in a health sector, so in 5G, technology, it's really important to notice that. So a surgeon can have a remote consultations or even an operation where he can have a case somewhere. He's in the US and somewhere in the Far East Asia. So that's the 5G capability also. If we talk about any other industry, or we take it to the enterprise, let's talk about manufacturing. Or it's the evolution of the IoT, which is the Internet of Things, and you see it's a devices connected, and that will really help manufacturing and telemedicine or any verticals of being efficient and how that being operated in a very efficient manner. So 5G is really a technology that we can see bringing a more value, and we see a strategy from each operator to have a very reliable and a cutting-edge technology among their competitors in their local markets or even globally.
I suppose before we accelerate too far down the 5G road, it's worth remembering that as much as that's being, at the dawn of the 5G age, perhaps in Western Europe and in parts of the Middle East and North America, indeed Asia, but there's a huge swathes of the world that are still rolling out 4G. And Tari, I realized that obviously now in your role at Arm Harith Infrastructure, you might be more looking at it from an investment perspective, but clearly in your previous role, you had a sort of pan-African view, I think, at the Africa Finance Corporation. And I'm intrigued to know or to hear from you perhaps, are there applications of 4G, technology to which we're very used? I'm sitting in London, we're very used to it. Are there novel applications of 4G that we're seeing, in developing economies that are particularly innovative?
No, absolutely. And I think just to give some color on your 4G versus 5G, I think Nigeria, that has one of the more advanced digital and telecommunication user bases, currently has a 30% 4G penetration, and actually has more of a 60 to 70% 3G penetration. And so the objective for a country like Nigeria and many in West Africa is basically to accelerate 4G coverage to enable the type of applications that are able to lift people out of poverty. Because the concept of the telecom networks providing the opportunity for the leapfrog effect that we've seen in Africa, I think has really taken off under the 4G networks with respect to how Nigerian and African consumers are able to operate both sort of basic services, for example, electricity consumption, trade, entrepreneurship, engagement, voice, learning, networking, etc. And so we're seeing some very interesting overlays of applications on the growing 4G and even some of the lower level networks for new businesses or new forms of consumption. And I'll give you an example, which is in this emerging distributed energy environment. As you're all aware, with the growth in renewable energy, a great opportunity we find in energy-starved environments is actually to go beyond the grid and to use distributed solar, distributed energy. But a key success node is the ability to tie that to the network, and for consumers to pay using the networks, to be able to monitor mini grids and microgrids using Internet of Things and using technology to be able to monitor remotely batteries, payments, systems, etc. And this is becoming so successful in countries like Nigeria that we find companies are actually spinning off their digital businesses that are used for infrastructure as completely separate businesses. And there are some other examples, but I'll just give you that one.
So actually, do those businesses tend to, do they benefit from higher valuations of earnings than do the kind of core utilities?
Absolutely. And in fact, I think a very interesting set of sort of transformational events happening in Africa right now is the growth of venture capital, and some of the most exciting exits that we've seen in the African markets in the last year have been in technology, digitization of payments, digitization of trade and cross-border payments, and fintech leveraging networks, and also being able to do that across 3G, 4G, and preparing for 5G. But let me also highlight one of the differences and the nuances in Africa is that our networks are built in circles. So there's a focus on 2G for some regions, 3G for some regions, 4, 5. And so you have a lot of multiplicity of networks. I'm sure other people on the panel know a lot more about that. But indeed, in fact, one of the companies we've been speaking to actually had a telco that wanted to buy only the digital and technology aspect that they had layered onto their energy business. And we were considering as an infrastructure fund only the energy business. The case I need to make is to be able to get infrastructure investment, allocators like pension funds to let me do the tech side as well. So.
Matteo, you started in your current role as CEO of BICS earlier this year, but had a long career at what is now Proximus, was previously known as Belgacom. I'm wondering if there are things that so your role, as far as I understand it, is now engaging a lot more with these sort of global markets. And I'm intrigued to know whether there are big differences, things that you've learned about some of these other markets away from Western Europe that surprised you, and where you've had to sort of, well, not necessarily add your skill set, but just generally that there are differences in those markets and the way they engage with telecoms more broadly that have come as a surprise.
Yeah, thank you, Alex. Thanks for having me. Interesting question. My answer to that is, of course, there's a lot to learn across geographies, across different type of economies. There is one element which is key, besides technology, is also the accessibility of those networks, the interworking of different type of technology in different type of countries to deliver global coverage, global accessibility for applications and for IoT. This is today remains a fundamental challenge, which next to technology evolution is often forgotten. So, and that's the business I'm having the honor to lead, as also that as a part of its mission. So to hide that complexity, to bring that global accessibility. And we do so by learning from multiple experience across geographies. There is definitely a different way of operating in emerging economies where sometimes they are really cutting edge in terms of, because their operating conditions are challenging, they come up with brilliant brilliant ideas that can also be mirrored in developed markets. So we continue to see that, and we will continue to bring to leverage this kind of diversity. But I want to come back also to the point made that there is another element besides technology, besides coverage and accessibility, is also the entry barriers to the developing of digital applications that are going to create value on these networks. And we see today that's another element where globally we find opportunities in areas where digital skills are mostly developed, and there is a very in other areas there is a high demand of digital skills. In other areas there is high supply or larger supply of those skills, because the fundamental value that this network will deliver is linked to the outcomes, to the digitization of industry, but also to the creation of business outcomes. And we see today that the barriers are coming down. Telecom communication are being unbundled, rebundled, integrated in software applications, so that every type of communication channel can be used to deliver the value.
So Matteo, so just to understand that a little bit more easily, so you're talking about barriers to entry for the new layers of telecom, and do you mean in the sense that because stuff is becoming more virtualized, you need to have better knowledge of software that requires a certain skill set that maybe doesn't exist in developing economies to the extent they do elsewhere in the world? Is it, to ensure I've understood you correctly?
Well, thanks, Alex. Let me make my point a little clearer then. So definitely you need new skills, but not only in terms of running as an operator. So as an operator, you need to capture new skills to basically thrive in the area of software. But you also need to lower the entry barrier to develop new businesses, new applications that can use these networks. Like has been said before, those new networks are more open. They can actually integrate application natively. And this means that you can program your network capability on the basis of application needs where it is required. That is the foundation of the so-called low latency as well. So you engineer networks from an end-to-end, from an application perspective. So the digital skills are required to operate this network, but also to foster an ecosystem of use cases, of applications that can deliver the value of the network. What we see today, we see definitely high demand of digital skills in developed economy, some opportunity in developing economy where there is more and more people being trained on these digital tools, and those digital tools themselves that are becoming more accessible because they hide the complexity behind application development environment like low code or no code. So it's easier to build a process in software. It's easier than it used to be, but still the demand of software skills it's greater than ever before. That's what we see.
So Adam, did you want to weigh in on that? I think you might be muted.
Thank you, Alex. And I just wanted to jump in on what Matteo was saying, because I think there's two aspects here. One is the end users actually having the skills to consume those digital services. There was an EU study that estimated that only 58% of people in the EU had the skill set to be able to digest those. So we have to enable the end users. And then there's training up the people to be able to run the infrastructure and develop those new services. Cisco have Network Academy, where we've got 4 million people trained in that environment. 93% of those go on to be employed in that industry. But I know there's generally a feeling we don't have that skill set. And the great thing is about providing that connectivity is you provide access to all those training skills. So we need to continue to accelerate that.
I do think that's a really interesting point, because I was looking even just at e-commerce in Europe, and actually e-commerce adoption in the UK, something like 30% of people have bought something online in the previous 3 months, and the next highest country in Europe was 15%, which actually makes me think that, Martin, you might have an interesting perspective on this. You obviously you are now at the Access Partnership, and you lecture at Lodz, I hope I pronounced that correctly, University of Technology, but you were previously a commissioner at the Broadband Commission for Sustainable Development. And I wonder actually, just even within Europe, if you see big differences and actually how those differences can be sort of evened out a little bit.
Yeah, definitely. What follows from my previous perspective, also as a white-collar clerk working for the Polish National Regulatory Authority, so partially responsible for both spectrum infrastructure as well as capacity building. What follows from all of that is that this technology, as a, let's say, this idea of network as a service, that it's, let's say, customized, tailored to very specified needs for both B2B and B2C clients, it brings us to a better solution regarding throughput, latency, capacity, but also is the first time in history that we can visibly accelerate with the fourth industrial revolution by means of changes in production, in manufacturing. So what Adam said about the capacity building and digital skills also reflects to also concerns, for example, labor market, and how we can, let's say, accelerate with some people who will not find, even without this, let's say, post-pandemic scenario, they will be not able to deliver their services in this typical way, let's say, anymore. So we need to think about how this kind of, let's say, labor market will be reshuffled by this very sophisticated and just-in-time delivered solutions. Last but not least, what we observe in Europe right now, it's the two pillars. First, rapidly growing numbers of tests and trials regarding B2B solutions with 5G in use, using, C-band 26 gigahertz and the others. And the second is the visible governmental willingness to deliver some social projects for capacity building. With the EU funds from the Resilience and Recovery Facility, we will deliver over 700 billion of euros in the, let's say, 3 or 4 year scenario for both twin transition, digital and green. And that's also really challenging to find the balance and, let's say, it's a level playing field for all stakeholders. Not only entrepreneurial one, but also these social movements, and also to overcome, to some extent, the social threats that are stemming from the new unknown technology and new solutions that the people sooner or later will have to face with.
Sheikh Mohammed, I'm interested to hear your view, because where do you feel that, not just, across Ooredoo's markets, I suppose, that the region is from a skills perspective? And do you build to match those skills, because you are literally deciding where to invest in networks? Do you build to match those skills, or do you build for where you want those skills to be?
Alex, I want just to say build on what Adam has just said about the skill set. I think let's understand the challenges that we're having today, and it really varies from developed countries to developing countries. Today, it's about also a mindset before that skill set. You just mentioned about also how the e-commerce increased for the last 3 months, and we would give the credit also to COVID-19, which really changed the mindset of people. And we, as leaders in the telecom industry, and here at Ooredoo, we always think the digital transformation is inevitable, and we have to go to that race. Answering your questions, the skill set, there is always a lack of a highly skill set. A percentage given by Adam about developed in EU countries, I'm sure all around the globe, you find the less percentage of that skill set. And this is also another challenge. But I would say that after COVID-19, for the last year and a half now, the mindset of customers, of all stakeholders or people have really changed. And that you can name it to consumer or to SME or any or B2B or enterprise. We at Ooredoo, we have seen a dramatic growth in data where people are digitizing their behavior. Also, the order online, whatever that they do, it was always remotely worked and behave. And that really accelerated the mindset of the leaders of the telco. And we are at Ooredoo, we are advancing into that aspect. And we are really searching for the highly skill set that really take us not just to matching, to be advancing to that level of digital skill set that we need.
Jamshid, you raised your hand. Was there something you'd wanted to add?
Yeah, talking about the scale, I think we need to look at two things. One is by digitalization of the network and containerization of the network going to 4G and 5G. So it's a new technology, new set of skill needed. But the good thing, especially with going with the 5G and disaggregation, is going to be in the past, when the technology was kind of monolithic, the source of skill for the network was coming from a certain set of the companies, mostly net, because the technology was just kind of so dedicated to a specific providers. So the source was there. But now, they're going to the virtualization of the network on the 4G and going to the containerization in the 5G by disaggregating the technology stack. Now you can go to more sources to bring the skill. For example,
I hate to cut you off. These are quite complex concepts, which people who maybe aren't acquainted with in the way that 5G works, without getting too technical, can you just explain exactly what you mean by disaggregation of the network, containerization, and virtualization? These are three terms which are widely known, but I feel for the sort of ingenue or the sort of person who's unacquainted with it, they might find those terms a little bit complicated.
Yeah, historically, when we talk about the 3G, 2G, the technology, the telco technology for connectivity was coming kind of a black box. There was a black box, hardware, software, everything hardwired together. You bring this box, put it there. By going to the 4G, they start separating the hardware from the software. Just simply saying, I'm going to have an infrastructure, a cloud, that I can bring network function from anyone to run it there. So that's the one I say disaggregation, separating the hardware from the software and opening the field for more contribution. So there is two technology to do that one. What is kind of virtualization that simply trying, the focus is that how you can get more value out of your boxes, infrastructure. Because you might have a box, a CPU and a server, just only dedicated to this specific software. You may be only using 10% of the power. I mean, you're wasting. Virtualization is enabled to kind of leverage more of that one, maybe 80%, 90%. But then the next technology came, containerization, that even goes to the further, provides capability that you can develop one specific software. It could be network, and you can deploy it anywhere. So goes to this concept of develop once and deploy anywhere. So kind of leverage. So those are technology, just simply by this.
So it means that basically you're not having to buy a new box for every single server that you have. You've got the software and you can install it everywhere, basically.
Exactly. For example, I was specifically working in India. I wouldn't mention the name of the operator, one of the telco. So when I was looking at the historical, when I went to the data center, there was lots of the boxes sitting there with a different label. This was going. But with virtualization, we just have a kind of a server, big server, then you can do it. So when we want to add more extra capacity, in most cases was bringing additional software or additional memory and everything. Wasn't like we need more physical space, we need more energy there. So that's simply, again, going to this kind of the transformation that telco is going on. So obviously we need a new set of the skills because of you need to manage the cloud, you need to manage the software, but you have more places to go to get the skill. For example, that is why, for example, now companies like IBM becoming relevant in this field because historically we were working on the IT side of it, a business application. Now we can bring our knowledge on the software, which was on the business, to the network. So that is.
And so the net effect then is that it brings the costs down, and it means that other countries which maybe wouldn't have been as fast to adopt it in the past have a greater opportunity to do so in future.
And you don't have that much dependency for 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 company because you just open up. So the other part of the skill I was mentioned before also is that the value of the network comes with what you do with the network. For example, look at the consumer on 4G. I mean, the Uber is using it. I mean, use it for all the other one. So the value on the 5G also is going to be what you do with it. So that you need to bring skill in the artificial intelligence, analytics, the data. And those are the skills you could say, I already have AI working on a different domain. I can leverage that skill to come here. Obviously, they need to get some training on the how to connect with the network, but just kind of the different sort of the skill is going to need it.
I understand. Terry, is there something you wanted to add?
Yes, I just wanted to touch on the skills point, and I know we've gone a bit far, so I'll just make it very quick, which is that, coming from the developing markets, we cannot ignore the layer of the youth demographic and also the lack of services that create a desperation from the consumer such that they learn very quickly. And what we're seeing in large markets like Nigeria and West Africa, with Nigeria having such a significant youth population, a great willingness to learn and adopt technology, is that we have a growing skills base around the creation of applications, the design of applications, and a lot of that skill is being developed locally and the applications are being developed locally. And the same with respect to consumption. The reality is that there are many Nigerians today who actually use network-based, phone-based payment systems and have never been into a bank. So there are actually more people using USSD, and this is not 5G, but this is in terms of the behavior and the skill, right? In that adoption of the skill and the almost the desperation and the gap is really pushing the sophistication level. And I think Matteo hinted to it that, in developing markets, we see a lot more rapid adoption and use for innovation and for innovative consumption. And we're also seeing now design. And we're getting to a point where we actually have international firms setting up, trying to harness some of that skill. It's not to say that there isn't a significant gap and there's a lot to be done, but when you have that significant disproportion of young people in a population, you have a lot more to work with, especially as the technologies advance the way they are.
I hope this isn't too crowbarred an elision, but I think that the idea of these developing economies and finance also maybe leads us to the point of we are talking about the benefits that these new networks or network in general can have for society, but most companies, most people investing in these networks presumably are doing so because they want to get a return on their investment. And so I wonder, therefore, how we address some of these financing issues where you can see social benefits to a lot of network investment, but it isn't the reason that people are investing in them. And since you had the conch already, I wonder what your thoughts were on that.
Me?
Yes, sorry.
I guess the view that we have operating out of countries like Nigeria is that it isn't an either or, and that with such significant gaps in service provision and product provision that can be delivered by digital networks, that the investment in a digital network and its ability to provide products and services to the underserved will deliver returns. And we've seen that in digital infrastructure time and time again because of the network effect and the continuous reduction in cost and ability to serve broader and broader spans with more intensity. That being said, of course, there are some areas that are a little bit trickier. Could be health, could be education, especially those that have a lot more of a physical infrastructure underpinning to it. That's where you see a lot of the challenges with getting a return. But what you've also found is in the case of innovation, and let's again look at the very sort of exciting things that we're seeing with respect to venture capital investments in digital applications in Africa, is that they are seeing the opportunities and the ability to integrate innovation out of Africa into their global digital platforms. Because what a lot of the youth, the young people in Africa are figuring out is how to design applications that are asset light and high velocity and are able to meet the metrics that global investors are looking for. And so with more and more young people figuring out how to drive profitability of these networks, we're going to see even more successful cases of solving social problems with digitization.
So in a very simplistic way, there's no point in writing an app that's vastly complicated and runs on AR when actually you're running it off a 3G or 4G or even a 3G network. And that makes perhaps the coding more efficient, and that's something you could take elsewhere. That sort of idea, is that the thing you're getting at? I'm massively simplifying, I appreciate.
I'm not speaking about the networks. I mean, right now, the designers are designing for what they have to work with, but so you wouldn't find an applications company out of Lagos today designing for a 5G network, because they're actually designing for a 4G and a 3G network. They're solving problems with those networks. Some of them are thinking, they'll create an app to look at how do you watch video in a compressed packet environment for 3G. So those are the problems they are solving. They are solving problems that are real to them. But what I think is very important is that it's not a significant gap. It's not a significant leap to take that type of expertise and mindset into designing an application for 5G, right? And so but right now, a lot of the 5G spectrum in Africa is currently being held. It's actually not being deployed. But once you start having it deployed, the skill sets are there to evolve solutions for those technologies.
I understand. I realized we strayed a little bit away from the actual financing point. Martin, I think you might have some thoughts on this. I'd be interested in your experience.
Yeah, it is obvious that no one wants to be a Santa Claus in this case, and we need to find a balance and an appropriate incentives for investments. What we started doing in Europe several years ago was to find the regulatory tools to find this kind of incentives by Broadband Cost Reduction Directive, urging operators to give symmetric access to their infrastructure, to use some access conditions, cost models, wholesale pricing that would be to some extent competitive, even for those areas when the return on assets are incomparably lower than, for example, for suburban urban areas.
You mean basically guaranteeing a return on investment?
Guaranteeing return on investments, guaranteeing some, let's say, lenient regulatory regimes regarding the competition, and of course some conditions for EU fund spending for both B2B and B2C connections. But we've got also several guidelines like connectivity toolbox, for example, to give the governments, having in mind their, let's say, interior and regional experience, some flexibility in terms how they want to spend money for infrastructure rollout. It is obvious that verticals needs to deliver a huge amount of money, first for spectrum and second for infrastructure rollout, which means that they need to have this kind of predictability even in the long-term scenario. I mean, the payback for wireless infrastructure is even longer than 15 years. So, which means that we need to find let's say, an appropriate conditions for them to find these incentives for investments. What we are also trying to do is to cover this, let's say, capacity building angle. I mean, to accelerate with some kind of demand from not only social, but also entrepreneurial, industrial branch of economy, looking for some synergies, as I mentioned previously, manufacturing, engineering, production, even rural angle right now, what is really important, sustainability and green solutions that are rapidly growing also as a, let's say, some kind of future solution. So this is the environment that Brussels and vast majority of EU member states recognize as a, let's say, as a future solution, and that's something that we should definitely follow.
Adam, I realize that some of your competitors enjoy some beneficial financing, possibly with postcodes in the Shenzhen area. I wonder how you think about financing to ensure that you do have as big a market as you possibly can when you're looking at Africa and South America and other parts of the world.
Thanks, Alex. And I wanted to perhaps build on what Taria was saying. We do tend to get carried away with technology and we try to put everything in, whereas sometimes we have to put the right technology in for the right application and build that in the right way. And building out the total cost of ownership models, often there's a huge expense up front before you actually get to the value of the network. And I think we're spending a lot of time at looking at how we build out that infrastructure and meet the right price point. We talk about the internet of the future. How do we get twice the throughput for half the power? How can we collapse the networks and simplify? Do you really need an optical network and a routed network? Can you collapse that down into a single routed optical network, which dramatically changes the barriers to entry? And then we can scale it up for the next 3 billion connections. So I think we need to look at that. There is the financing aspect, but there's also making sure that you can actually launch the service and expand it. Flexible consumption models with software. So we start small, but we actually grow very quickly.
We are coming up on our last 5 minutes, so I'll ask people, if possible, to keep answers relatively short so that everybody has a chance to have their last crack at the whip. Matteo, I saw you raise your hand. Is that, are you approaching it from the perspective of trying to get into markets, or are you more turning to trying to find ways to finance it yourselves? And I think you might be muted.
Sorry, if I may, both sides of the equation, because they are pretty much linked. So just maybe a small comment. I think basically creating externalities on new network investment drive usage and answer the question about return. And to create externality means you have to transform those networks in digital platforms through software. Today, we speak about developing an app. That's not sufficient. We know that the majority of users or end users don't like to communicate towards a brand just with an app. They like to remain engaged through programmable communications. And that can be things like omnichannel, things that have made the fortune of a lot of CPaaS players out there. So that is something, that is value that is in that telco can aim to capture going forward. Because at the end of the day, as Jamshid has mentioned, these networks are becoming more and more open, more and more versatile, and they can capture capture the needs of applications. The value, I think telcos have understood the value of infrastructure. We have seen many of the transactions out there, but not yet the value of creating ecosystems and capturing a fair share of that value. And I think that should be the focus. And I believe the emerging economy are going to tell a story about that, because they have a faster and a larger base of digitally savvy users. And we will see, because they have a younger generation that are jumping into this, as you said yourself, they are leapfrogging into digital adoption.
Sheikh Mohammed, Matteo says that telecoms aren't building these ecosystems. You run a telecoms company. What do you think?
Thanks, Alex. I want to highlight about your question of the return on the investment. So if I take it from that perspective from 5G, let's agree telco are really have a debatable topic about 5G monetization. And no investor or shareholder around the world that will put our money or investment without any return. So today I would simplify it for the audience here, how we can get the best return on investment. Telco have been really looking into how to do a smart CapEx investment. And what I mean by that is through a proper and a smart segmentation. So I go for a segment that really cater for a high value segment, and how I can bundle this also through innovative solution, which my colleague also touched base about. And that's the way how telco can get innovative solutions and bundle their product and services, and they can do these investments smartly, which have a better return on investments.
Jamshid, I see you raise your hand. We've got about 2.5 minutes left, so please keep it brief.
Sure. So the thing is that in terms of addressing the total cost of ownership, I think, as was said before, we need to have a way to monetize that investment. So, for example, if they want to focus only on connectivity, that may not pay off. I mean, most of the telcos is moving to become a digital service provider or become a digital service enabler, because that's the way you start using. The second thing is, for example, we did a project with the Vodafone Group and University of Surrey based on the 5G, creating a development platform to inviting the ecosystem to come and develop the application. So create an open architecture so that people can come and add the value, a concept similar to what Apple has for the App Store. And the last but not the least also is going to be, as was said before, create opportunity to go to the adjacent businesses, because that is coming, telcos becoming the insurance company, becoming the bank. So, I mean, if a company is a kind of the innovative, they can come up with a way to monetize that investment on digital service provider, enabler, creating the platform.
But I suppose then and you think by doing that, that helps the social goals as well. So you create a business model where they can make money from these other means, and that helps then achieve these social intentions too.
Exactly. It helps with the social cause. I mean, it helps the people to grow the business, because then you have a digital service platform. You can help the people to come and start business using your platform. I mean, look at, for example, what Apple did with their App Store. Lots of these individual people develop application and sell them. So the same thing could be done in this environment. And that would be the way to monetize the investment, and then that should pay off the total cost of ownership.
In perhaps 20 seconds, do you think that's possible in places that don't have 5G? And Tari, I'm looking to you for this one.
Yes.
You do? Okay, well, brilliant. We've got 30 seconds left, so it's time for me to wrap up. I'm really grateful to all the panelists. You've offered some really helpful insights. We've skated across a lot of topics, so I do hope that you, the audience, have found it interesting as well. I hope you enjoyed the rest of the panels for the duration of the conference. And for me, it's a great thank you to everyone who's tuned in and to everyone who's participated. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you.